Well, hello everyone. I am going to do a teaching. It kind of goes hand in hand with the one that I did last week on spiritual warfare. But this one, it is spiritual warfare, but it's a different, I guess, a different branch of it. And so I want to share something that, as I was reading in my Bible this week, and it just really stood out to me that this was what I really wanted to share on my next video. And it's about how the enemy will set us up to sabotage ourselves, and he's constantly trying to get us entrapped and bound by things, and sometimes it's the simplest way. Sometimes it's like the most, when you look back, you think, oh my gosh, this should have never happened. And I'm sharing this because this is one of the avenues the enemy used on me for years, and I'm teaching it to remind myself to not also have to go through this. And the enemy is very sly and deceitful, and he will do anything to cause us to enslave ourselves by decisions we make, rash decisions, and set us up in traps. And so I was reading this last week about King Herod, the story about King Herod. And I'm going to be even though I was reading in Matthew, I liked the story in Mark better. So I'm going to be reading the story from Mark, and it's Mark 6. And King Herod married his brother's wife, Herodias, and Herod, his brother's name was Philip. And so Herodias was Philip's wife, and I don't know what happened between Herodias and Philip, but it ended up that Herod ended up marrying his brother's wife, Herodias. And John the Baptist would come to the king, and he would say, what you're doing is evil. This is, basically a sin before the Lord. And so I'm going to read this, and I'm going to read how the enemy set up Herod. And also, it was not only did he set up Herod, but it was the very tool that the enemy used that John the Baptist was killed. And so John the Baptist was the one that was prophesied in the Old Testament, the voice crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. And so anyway, this story is, it's one of those stories that, you probably don't really pay a whole lot of attention to, but there is so much depth in the teaching that can give us answers on how we can save ourselves from being set up in the same trap that Herod got set up in. So anyway, let me just read a little bit. This is Mark 6. Like I said, I'm going to start with verse 7. I've already laid the foundation of how Herod and John the Baptist were connected. It was through Herodias, his wife. So anyway, verse 17 of John 6 says, for it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, it is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife. And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and kept him safe. And when he heard him, even though he didn't like John the Baptist for what he said, that he had done this unrighteous thing, it says when he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly. Sometimes when we share about the Lord with the world, some people, they don't understand, but they feel something in the words of Christ, the words of the Lord, the Bible, the biblical truth has power and anointing in it. And so that's how Herod was. He wasn't understand. He was perplexed by it, but he knew him to be a righteous man, and he knew that the things that he spoke, it had depth to it. It had substance to it. So let me go on, and this is what I'm going to teach about. But an opportune time came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet for all his nobles and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. And when Herodias' daughter came in and danced, She pleased Herod and all the guests. And the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it to you." And he vowed to her, "Whatever you ask, I will give to you, up to half the kingdom." And so she went immediately to her mother, and she said, "What should I ask?" And the mother said, "For the head of John the Baptist." And so she came in immediately with haste to the king and asked, saying, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." And the king was exceedingly sorry, but because of his oaths and his guests, he did not want to break his word to her. So immediately the king sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head, and he went and beheaded him in prison and brought his head on a platter and gave it to the girl, and the girl gave it to his mother. And so this story is one of the most tragic stories in the Bible. To begin with, think about being a young girl, probably, between, in those days, these girls probably could have been anywhere between 13, 14, all the way up to in their 20s, who knows, because they always had a harem of girls, and but this just happened to be the king's wife's daughter. So when she was brought in, imagine if a king told you could have up to half of his kingdom. Most girls would have said, "Well, shoot, I want gold, silver, I want my own apartment, whatever." But this girl, instead of, asking for all the great things, she went to her mother. So obviously her mother had some kind of a manipulating hold upon her, and to think that this girl would choose to want to take a man's life than to get all the things that she could have got. But obviously John the Baptist was causing her mother so much, kind of like this woman kind of had a controlling Jezebel spirit, actually, to be honest with you, because Herodias, she had influence on her husband and her daughter, but she didn't have quite enough influence on her husband to wipe this man out. And so but she literally was like her own sense of a Jezebel for her day. And anyway, so the sad part is number one, that this young girl couldn't make a better choice. But then to be so manipulated and controlled by her mother that she went and did, and she chose this. But the sad thing is when I read that to you, it says an opportunity came when Herod on his birthday gave a banquet. This was an opportune time for the devil to take Herod and manipulate him. And, Herod respected John the Baptist. And so I believe in time it could have been that Herod would have really seen the truth. But the enemy knew that John the Baptist was gaining ground with this king. And so he was going to do everything he could to close the mouth of John the Baptist. The devil was just trying to take John the Baptist out by any means. So he was looking for an opportune time, and he just chose this moment for his time. I want to compare this to our lives and how sometimes the enemy will use opportune times in our life to set us up also. He will come in vulnerable moments when we are, like I'll just share some of mine that, that the enemy has set up in my life, multiple times in my life. I remember a couple of times in my life when I would see someone that had a new car and I didn't have a new car. And, our car would be paid for. I remember we had this really, really nice green van. It was older. It was a nice car and it was completely paid for. But I saw some of my other friends, and they had new cars, and I liked their cars, and I would see pictures of new cars and advertisement of new cars. And so it came to an opportune moment when the enemy used my own immaturity, and he used my lust, I guess, the lust of my eyes, to have something that that was really, we really couldn't afford a new car. Maybe we could afford it, but it would be hardship on us. And so, but for some reason at that right moment, how the enemy will do, at that right moment, he used Maybe we saw something and we went and looked at it, or maybe, I don't even remember how all the things would come about, how we would end up going to a car dealership. I don't remember, I don't know if we saw an ad or what, I don't know how it happened. But a couple of times I remember when we couldn't afford a car, that either my husband or I would make a decision, and when we had our cars paid off, we didn't have any bills except for just our house and other little bills. But we would go buy a car, and it would cost us $400 or $500, probably $400. Well, one time my husband had to buy a truck, and it ended up being $700 for his business, and it was a hardship, and it was like 5 or 6 years of trying to pay that truck off, and then my car, I think it was like 4 or 5 years, I don't remember now. But the enemy played on that moment, and then you get to the car dealership, and you don't want to look like, maybe even if you're, thinking second thoughts, like maybe I shouldn't do this, and you don't want to feel embarrassed. You're like, well, I've already come this far, I can't back out now. And how the enemy plays on our emotions. And what I want to share about Herod is how Herod, it says here in verse 26, and it says, the king was exceedingly sorry, but because of his oaths and his guest, he did not want to break his word to her. The enemy played on his emotions. He had a little bit of pride. He didn't want to break his vow and look like he was, he had more pride than that. He didn't want to look like he would, like he couldn't do something he said. But the truth is, as the king, he could have said, I'm not going to kill a man. That wasn't part of this deal. But his pride wouldn't let him. So the enemy set him up. And there's a scripture in the Bible, and I want to read this real quick for all of us. And this, like I said, this is a reminder for myself. I am not pointing my fingers at anybody, because I'm telling y'all what, I need this as much, if not more, than anybody else. But there's a scripture that talks about whenever, that the Lord always makes a way of escape. And it is 1 Corinthians 10 and verse 13. And it says, verse 13. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man, but God is faithful and will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. And so God, in those moments when we were buying a car or whatever, furniture, over the years, when we were a single income household for many years, because I was a stay-at-home mom, and I would always have like little part-time jobs like selling Avon or cleaning houses. I did that for, off and on for many years, but I was always a stay-at-home mom. I was with my kids until they were, they were older. And even when they were older in high school, I had a store. I opened my own little store, and so they would come with me to work. And so, so we kind of struggled financially for years because of that. And so, the Lord would provide us a way of, we could have got out of maybe buying that furniture. But when you get at that moment and you want it so bad, you want that new car so bad, you got that fresh car smell or that furniture, and you can just imagine that furniture in your house or whatever it is. It might not even be that. Whatever the situation is, that, in that moment, that weakness, we know in the back of our mind, well, I could walk away, but I've put this poor little salesperson through all this today or whatever. So we don't walk away. But truly, God gives us a way of escape. And he does that for each one of us. And every time when that happened, and we sabotage ourselves, though. We sabotage our future. We sabotage our ability to put money back or whatever. And it may not even be about money. It might be something entirely different, where we make a decision that our pride gets in the way. And maybe there's a relationship God's wanting to restore door in our life. And instead of, you know, literally, I always say, just eat crow, Susan. And even if you haven't done something wrong, if there's a relationship involved, it's better to eat crow and apologize, even if you're not wrong, and to make a relationship right than it is to have your pride and let something stand in your way. That's something that, you know, the Lord has shared with me for several years, you know, to just eat crow. And it's hard. It's hard to humble yourself and say, I'm sorry, when you know for a fact that you're probably right about something. And maybe you're not right. But even if you are right, even if for 100%, 1,000% you're right, but if it's going to break a relationship, it's not worth it. And so the Lord has told me many times, just eat crow, say you're sorry, mend that relationship, make things right, because God is more concerned about relationships than He is about your ability or you know, you looking right or something. And I want to share one other little story real quick, and this is in 2 Samuel 11. And this is about David and Bathsheba. And I want to show you that he also had the same situation come up that King Herod did. It was an opportune time. And this is 2 Samuel 11. And it says, in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab and his servants with him and all Israel. And they ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. So David, when all the kings were out to battle, that's where he was supposed to be. He was supposed to be, because, you know, there's are times and seasons for all kinds of things. There are warfare seasons in our life, y'all. And when we're in a warfare season, if we just sit back and we don't do anything, the enemy will use that as an opportune time in our life. There are seasons when we have seasons of great battles in prayer, and we need to use those seasons to pray. Whatever God is dealing with us to pray. I have a few things that I'm praying for right now. You know, and I am battling in the spirit for not just for myself, my family, but for some other people that God has shown me to be praying for. So when God, you know, we may not be having a literal battle like, you know, like this was literal battle for His kingdom, but what happened when David stayed home instead of going and doing where he was supposed to be? All of a sudden one night, I'm just not going to read the story, but you can go read this in 2 Samuel 11. One afternoon, he's just sitting and he's just looking out his window, and all of a sudden he sees this beautiful woman just not too far from where he lives, just across the way. She's up on her on the roof of her house bathing. To begin with, why is she doing that on the roof of her house? You know, why would she be bathing right in front of the king window? You know, it kind of makes you wonder about Bathsheba also. I don't want to accuse the woman, but it sounds a little bit, you know, like she was maybe trying to get his attention. I don't know. But anyway, he saw this woman bathing, and immediately, because he was in the wrong place at the wrong time, an opportune moment came that the enemy, he pulled David in because of his own lust. And that's what the enemy uses our own weaknesses against us. And so it says here that what happens is it happened late one afternoon when David arose from the couch, was walking on the roof, that he saw from a roof a beautiful woman bathing, and the woman was very beautiful. And David sent someone and inquired about the woman and said, is this not Bathsheba, the daughter of Elam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite? And David sent messengers and took her, and she came to him and lay with her. She had been purifying herself from her uncleanness, and then she returned to her house, and the woman conceived. And she told David, I am pregnant. So not only did he sleep with the man who slept with his wife was out to war. He was actually in the battle where David should have been. And so then when he slept with this woman, then she got pregnant. So now he's got two problems. Now he's sinned against God. He's taken another man's wife, and now she's pregnant. And so then David, he realizes, oh my goodness, this woman's pregnant. So then he calls the commander, I think it's Joab. He calls for Joab, and he says, bring Uriah back, for a break from war. Because the reason he did that is because he was hoping that Uriah would go in and lay with Bathsheba, and so he would never get caught that he had slept with his his wife and got her pregnant, and Uriah would just think that his wife was pregnant from him. But guess what? When Uriah came back, he was like, I can't go into my wife. I can't do that because all my fellow brothers are out there in battle. And so he took a little break, but he just slept right on the front door of his house, and he would not go in and lay with her. And so then now David's in a pickle. So then what does he do? When Uriah goes back, he tells the commander, he says, put Uriah on the front of the battle, because the reason he wanted him at the height of war is because he needed him dead, so he still wouldn't get caught. So I'm not going to read that whole story, but the crux of this story is that not only did David not go where he was supposed to go, he slept with the woman, got the woman pregnant, brought the man back to try to get out of the problem he created, and the man was such a worthy, honorable man that he wouldn't even go in and sleep with his wife when all his brothers were still out to battle. And then he had him killed in battle. And so eventually the Lord sent the prophet and told David, this is what you've done. You had all these other women. Why did you have to sleep with someone else's wife? And of course, David repented. The baby ended up dying. But what I'm saying is, David, the enemy uses opportune times when we have a season of weakness. But God always provides a way of escape for us. And so these men in the Bible are no different than we are. That we have to be very careful. One thing I have learned, and I still need to know, and like I said, this is for me. This is not just, I'm just not pointing my fingers at everybody else. I'm literally pointing my finger at myself. Now, because of so many mistakes that my husband and I have made over the years of, we've bought so many houses and so many cars and, all the things, we got ourselves in debt many, many years ago, and by the Lord's grace, he got us out, and we've really tried not to get in debt again since then. But the enemy over the years has caused me to make all kinds of decisions, rash, quick decisions. And now, because of that, I almost like back up so much that I'm like, sometimes I almost wait too long to make a decision because I have been burnt so many times. But that's what I wanted to share with y'all, is that the enemy will try to set us up with all kinds of decisions, whether it's in relationships, whether it's buying things, whether it's making, like jumping from one job to another job. I mean, people do that, and then I did that one time. I had a horrible job. I was working at a bank. It wasn't really, the job was amazing, but the boss was so mean. She was so mean, and I prayed and I prayed and I prayed. And right when, at the very time we got a new management, I had just got another job, and I kept having this. I kept feeling like I didn't have peace. I didn't have peace about leaving, but I had already committed to this other thing. And this new boss came in, right, like I said, right at the same time. And so I had just given them a notice. And this man, it was a young man, and he begged me to stay there. And I knew that I should stay there, but I didn't, because I did not understand that the enemy was setting me up. And y'all, this other job did not work out. It was the biggest mistake of my life. And what would have happened with this other guy, he had already told me he was going to promote me. And I probably would have literally gotten like the position that the other woman had that was so mean over me. And he had already told me that he knew of the situation that was going on. But I felt like it was too far in, and I didn't know how to get out. And I had let me tell you another thing that happened. I had the same thing happen with my first marriage. I knew probably for a couple weeks before I actually married this guy, I knew that I shouldn't marry him. But I was so far in, I did not know how in that, as a 19, I was 19 or 20, I can't remember now. I did not know how to back out of it. My parents have spent, hundreds of, probably even a couple $1,000s. This was, like probably 40 years ago. So, this is about 40 years ago. So they probably spent $2,000 or $3,000. I didn't know how to get out of it without causing just a big mess. And there had been a couple people that had told me this was God. And so I also felt like, that was a trap for me. And so I was listening to elder, religious people that I thought were very spiritual, mothers and fathers that knew better than I did, even though I didn't feel the love that I knew that I shouldn't feel. So I didn't know how to get out of it. So it was a trap for me, and it caused so much devastation. Now, looking back now, I have a daughter and I have a granddaughter, so I wouldn't go back and change it now because of, what God gave me. But I'm telling you, at the time, the enemy set me up, but the Lord also provided me. I had a couple of weeks, and even the very day, I could have not done it, but I was so scared. But I'm just sharing all that to say that the Lord will, it may not be easy. When the Lord says he provides a way of escape, it doesn't mean it's easy. It's actually probably hard, but we can make the choice to back out. I remember when my daughter was getting married, and I had told her, I told both my daughters for years and years, if you're about to get married, I don't care if you're fixing to walk down that aisle, if you have one inkling of fear that you're not doing the right thing, and you just feel like this is not right, you tell me. I don't care if we spent thousands of dollars. I do not want you to go through with it. I said, I will be the bad guy. I will walk out there. I will tell everybody, because just the trauma that it put me through. And I never wanted my children to feel that position. And, and I've always told them, if anything ever is wrong, you can always come home, So, the Lord, though, that's how he is. That is the kind of Father we have. He provides a way. That doesn't mean it wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be sticky, backtracking on those situations. But I wanted to share that with y'all, that, if you ever have that feeling, because I feel like the Lord does kind of give us that, like, oh gosh, I was, like a dread, like I really wish I wasn't going through with this. I really wish I wouldn't have done this. I promise y'all, if you will go with that unction and just back out of it, and who cares about your pride? Guess what? People will, you might be talked about for 2-3 days, but you know what? People are so concerned about themselves. They're that story's going to move on in about 3 or 4 days, and it's all going to be good. So, that's just looking back now. And, as, someone that's, a little bit older, I'm not 60 yet. I will be 60. So I'm not old, but I do have a few years under my belt of walking through things. And if I can help one person, if I can help just a few people, it's worth it, because God is so good, and he does everything he can to help us from, entrapping ourselves and setting ourselves up. And so anyway, I hope that this will give you some insight and, some scriptural references. And I'm sure there's many, many more that I could have, shared with y'all. But if this helps you and it saves you from, making a mistake, and taking a job or buying a car or something that it's just not the right time, or whatever it is, I thank God. I want to help people, and, because the Lord is good, and he cares for us, and he doesn't want us to get in a situation that we really shouldn't be in. So anyway, and please, thank y'all so much for liking my last post. I cannot believe how there was a comment on it and stuff, and it helped so much to get it out, and several people, it blessed them so much. And so please like, share, comment, and I really appreciate it. I love you all so much. God bless you. Thank you.